Welcome to New American Mythos, where old stories are kindled like firelight, and we gather round to remember the tales that shaped us. Tonight, we enter Britain after Rome was gone. The legions no longer guard the roads. The old imperial order has thinned. Saxon pressure rises along the coasts. Kingdoms form and fracture. Stone villas crumble into pasture. And in the space Rome once filled, smaller powers struggle to hold what they can. The story of Arthur has been told many times. In the romances, especially in Le Morte d'Arthur, this unsettled land becomes the stage of Arthur's legend. Not a golden age, but a realm held together by memory and fear. A Britain where strong men rule regions, where oaths bind for a season, and where peace depends on a single commanding will. That will was Uther Pendragon. And now, Uther is dead. Without him, the realm does not collapse at once. It frays. Dukes fortify their keeps. Barons ride armed even to feasts. Churches still ring their bells, but the roads between them grow uncertain. The land waits, not merely for strength, but for settlement. Earlier this season, we walked in Sherwood Forest with Robin Hood, where justice rose outside corrupted authority. We watched St. George stand against the dragon, defending the vulnerable at the edge of the kingdom. Now we come to a harder and more dangerous hope. What if justice could sit upon a throne? What if strength could be bound not merely by fear, but by oath? Arthur's legend begins not with conquest, but with a sign. A sword in stone, a claim that kingship is not seized by ambition, but is received, and therefore is answerable to something else. This is not yet Camelot at its height. This story is Camelot at its birth. A beginning luminous with promise, and fragile because it rests not in iron alone, but in the vows of men. This is Arthur, the Sword and the King. Christmastide in London. After Uther Pendragon died, Britain did not fall silent. It grew louder. Lords rode more often than before. Messengers crossed frozen fields at dusk. In the east, Saxon sails were sighted and vanished again like questions left unanswered. Yet, when Christmastide approached, the greater lords of Britain still made their way to London, as they had in Uther's day. For whatever else had weakened, custom had not. They came under banners stiff with frost, cloaks lined in fur, retinues close behind. The roads were thick with travelers, knights, abbots, and merchants, hoping proximity might profit them. Smoke from 100 hearths drifted low in the winter air. The great church bells rang on Christmas Eve, and men who might meet in battle a month later stood shoulder to shoulder in worship. Candles burned in long rows before the altar. The archbishop presided with solemn steadiness, his voice rising above the gathered breath of the realm. Peace was proclaimed in liturgy, if not in fact. After Mass, the lords withdrew to their feasts. Halls filled with heat and noise. Boar was carved. Ale passed from hand to hand. Laughter rose, too loudly at times. And beneath it ran quieter conversations. Who held which fort? Whose levy had thinned? Which alliances might be renewed now that Uther's shadow no longer fell across them all? It was on Christmas morning, before the next bell, that the first whisper moved through the city. Something stands in the churchyard. Men left their tables half finished. Cloaks were thrown over shoulders. Boots struck frost-hardened ground. The churchyard filled, not with ceremony, but with curiosity edged by suspicion. There, before the doors through which they had passed for worship the night before, stood a block of stone none remembered seeing. Upon it rested an anvil, and in the anvil, sunk clean and straight, was a sword. Frost clung to the blade, but did not conceal the inscription carved into the stone beneath it. Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king, born of all England. The words did not glitter, they did not flare, they lay in the stone as plainly as law. For a moment no one spoke. Then someone laughed, short and dismissive. Another muttered about Merlin. A third crossed himself. The archbishop arrived not in haste, but with deliberation. He read the inscription once in silence. Then he read it aloud, his voice steady and carrying. The yard, moments before full of shifting men, grew still.
"If this be mockery," he said at last, "it is bold. If it be providence, it is greater still."
One duke stepped forward at once, as though unwilling to let the moment ripen. "Then let us settle it," he said. "Why wait?" The archbishop's gaze lingered on him long enough to cool the challenge.
"Because," he replied, "haste is the servant of pride, and pride has never yet crowned a king."
He did not forbid them outright. He did something more subtle.
"We will not answer a sign with chaos," he said. "On New Year's Day, after prayer and fasting, let the lords of this realm test what stands before them, in full witness."
It was both piety and strategy. The feast resumed, but it had changed. Conversations that evening circled back to the churchyard. Some swore they would draw the sword easily. Others said nothing, but counted quietly what it would mean if they could not. Outside, beneath the winter stars, the sword stood in silence. The first trial, New Year's Day. When New Year's Day came, the city was colder still. The bells rang before dawn, and the lords gathered again in the church before stepping into the yard. The archbishop had ordered fasting, and not all were pleased by it. Hunger sharpens pride as easily as humility. The first to approach the stone did so with confidence born of battle. He removed his gloves slowly and set his boots firmly. He pulled. Nothing. He adjusted his grip as though iron might respond to technique. Nothing. Another tried, then another. Armor strained and breath steamed in the air. Murmurs and grunts rose and fell. The sword did not move. By noon, irritation had replaced curiosity. By dusk, unease had replaced irritation. The archbishop did not declare the sign false. He did not declare the lords unworthy. He said only, "Candlemas is near. We will try again then." And so the waiting began. And on the day, Candlemas came with thinner light. The lords gathered again in London, though fewer laughed openly now. The feast was smaller, the talk was sharper. Word had traveled beyond the city that a king stood in stone and would not yield. Merchants spoke of it in roadside inns. Priests mentioned it cautiously in homilies. Saxon scouts heard rumor of it from fishermen, who swore England had a sword that chose its master. In the churchyard, the stone remained as before, its edges now darkened by damp and frost. The archbishop ordered the trial after Mass, not before. "Let men stand first beneath the reading of Scripture," he said, before they laid hands upon iron. And then they tried again. One lord brought half his household to witness what he was certain would be his triumph. When the sword did not move, he laughed as though he had never intended seriousness. Yet That night he left London earlier than planned. Another lord, known more for cunning than strength, tried with careful precision, adjusting his stance, twisting the hilt as though a hidden mechanism might be coaxed loose. The sword did not stir. By afternoon, the crowd had grown restless. Murmurs moved, not in awe, but in irritation. "It is trickery," some said. "Then expose it," others replied. The archbishop did neither. He did not defend the sign with rhetoric. He did not accuse the lords of pride. He simply announced that Easter would bring another trial. Easter arrived with brighter air, but no greater clarity. The realm had now endured 3 holidays of public failure. Pride, when first wounded, flares. When wounded repeatedly, it hardens. Some lords refused to attempt the sword at all, claiming their dignity forbade such spectacle. Others tried only to prove they would not be seen shrinking from challenge. And yet, each man failed. And with each failure, the weight of the inscription deepened. "Rightwise born, King of all England." Born, not elected, not acclaimed, not negotiated. The word lingered like a thorn. The archbishop, shrewd beneath his vestments, understood that the longer the sword resisted, the more impossible it would be to dismiss when it finally yielded. So he kept order through liturgical patience. He required the sword to be guarded day and night. He forbade private attempts. He bound the sign to the church's calendar, as though saying, "If this be of God, then it will unfold in God's time." Pentecost approached. By then, something subtler had changed in the realm. The question was no longer which lord would draw the sword. The question had become whether any lord could. The great men of Britain had strained in public before rivals and inferiors alike. Their strength had proven insufficient. Their bloodlines had not compelled the iron. The stone had made no exception for reputation. In halls and across the land, the conversation shifted. If not them, then who? And in that widening uncertainty, expectation grew. A household apart. There was at that time a boy named Arthur. If you looked at him, you would not have seen a king. He was sturdy, bright-eyed, quick to laugh, and quick to listen, and quick to move. More like the son of a good household than the heir of a throne. He had been raised not in public splendor, but in the keeping of Sir Ector, a knight with honest hands and a quiet household. Arthur grew among squires and horses and the smell of leather and oats, learning the common disciplines that make men useful: to serve, to ride, to bear arms, to hold his tongue, and to keep his promises. He loved Sir Ector like a father, and he loved Ector's older son, Kay, like a brother, though Kay had a sharper temper and a proud streak that made him look older than his years. Arthur did not know, could not yet know, that blood can be hidden like a coal under ashes. While lords tested iron before crowds, there was one household where the matter remained distant. Sir Ector's hall was neither the largest nor the poorest in Britain. It was orderly, disciplined, and warm with steady labor. Horses were tended, arms maintained, lessons given. Arthur rose each morning before the sun touched the frost. He moved through the routines of a squire without complaint. He trained with wooden sword and shield. He listened to tales of battle told by men who had ridden under Uther. He learned not merely how to strike, but how to wait for command. He did not brood over the sword in London. He heard of it as others heard of distant rumor. Interesting, perhaps important, but far from his own place in the world. Kay, however, spoke of it often. Kay's ambition burned brighter than Arthur's, and the thought that a nameless birth might suddenly eclipse noble houses unsettled him. "If it be real," Case once said sharply, "it will yield to one of us."
And if not, then it is a jest meant to shame men."
Arthur did not answer. He was content in service. The question of kingship belonged to others. Thus the realm waited in tension. Thus pride exhausted itself in public. Thus a sign remained unanswered, until a small inconvenience, a forgotten sword, opened what months of ambition could not. The tournament and the drawing. The tournament in London that spring was larger than any held since Uther's death. Perhaps it was bravado. Perhaps it was hope. Banners from rival houses stood side by side along the lists. Merchants crowded the outer field. Ladies watched from raised galleries, their veils bright against the sky. Men still spoke of the sword in the churchyard, but they did so now with a tone that mixed frustration and fascination. It had become part of the realm's rhythm, an unanswered question lingering in stone. Sir Ector rode into London with Kay and Arthur among his retinue. Kay had been newly knighted and meant to prove himself. Arthur, serving as his squire, saw in the field only opportunity to serve well. Trumpets sounded, the lists opened, horses stamped and snorted in the cool air. And in the midst of that morning's rush, armor being tightened, reins adjusted, spectators pressing for view, Kay discovered his sword was not at his side. His temper flared instantly. "Arthur," he snapped, "ride back and fetch it. I will not stand in the field unarmed like some merchant's son." Arthur bowed his head and went at once. He rode hard through London's narrow streets, weaving past carts and pedestrians. When he reached their lodging, the doors were barred. The servants had all gone to the lists, and no one answered his knock. For a moment he stood uncertain in the street, his breath still quick from the ride. Then he remembered the sword in the churchyard. It was not reverence that led him there, not destiny, not ambition, only necessity. The yard was quieter than it had been during the feast days. The stone stood as always, the anvil upon it, the blade fixed fast. Arthur dismounted. He approached without ceremony. He grasped the hilt. He expected resistance, but there was none. The sword slid freely, as smooth as if he had drawn it from its sheath. Its sound was small, almost intimate, iron leaving its rest. Arthur stared at the blade, confused more than astonished. He looked at the stone, half expecting the sword to leap back into place. Nothing happened. The world did not shift. No voice spoke, no light altered. He wrapped the sword in cloth and mounted again. At the field, Kay seized it impatiently and drew it from the fabric. And then he froze. "This is no common blade," he said slowly. His eyes lifted to Arthur. "Where did you get this?" Arthur answered plainly. "From the churchyard. It stood there, and I needed one." Kay's face changed, not only in surprise, but in calculation. He said nothing further, but brought the sword at once to Sir Ector. Sir Ector took it in both hands and examined it long. Then he turned to Arthur. "Come with me," he said quietly. They rode to the churchyard together, Sir Ector, Kay, and Arthur, apart from the noise of the tournament. Before the stone, Ector spoke carefully. "Put it back." Arthur obeyed. The blade entered the anvil as though it had never left. "Now," Sir Ector said, and his voice was no longer casual, "draw it again." Arthur placed his hand upon the hilt. He pulled, and the sword came free without effort. Sir Ector's breath caught. Kay stepped back involuntarily. Sir Ector fell to his knees upon the frost. "My lord," he said. Arthur recoiled as if struck. "Do not kneel," he said quickly. "You are my father." Sir Ector lifted his head. "I have been your guardian," he said gently, "not your sire. You are the son of Uther, Pendragon, and rightful king." The words did not feel like triumph. They felt like loss. Arthur looked from Ector to Kay and back again, as though the world he had inhabited that morning had quietly dissolved. He looked at the sword in his hand. It no longer seemed a convenience. It seemed a burden. Let's pause there for a moment. The sword seemed like a burden. Arthur does not shout. He does not lift the sword in triumph. He does not fall to his knees in gratitude. He stands confused. The sword has answered a question the realm has been asking for months. It has settled what dukes could not settle and what ambition could not compel. Yet the one it names is the only one who was not trying. This is how kingship enters the legend, not through grasping, but through interruption. Arthur went to fetch a weapon for another man's honor. He did not go to claim a throne. The miracle breaks into necessity, not ambition, and when it does not feel like a reward. It feels like weight. And that matters, because the story is telling us that authority received is different from authority that is seized. A man who seizes power believes he has earned it. A man upon whom power is laid must decide whether he will bear it. Arthur's first response is not command. It is confusion and almost reluctance. He does not yet know the wars that will follow. He does not know the resistance gathering in halls beyond this yard. He knows only that the life he inhabited this morning has been quietly removed from him. Foundations often begin that way, not with banners, but with obedience before understanding. And yet, even here, the fragility is visible. The sword has named him, but the realm has not yet received him. What is given in a moment must be confirmed in time. And so, the miracle is only the beginning. Let's return to the story. The public proving. Sir Ector did not leave the matter in secrecy. Whatever shock he felt, he understood that concealment would breed suspicion faster than revelation. Before the day ended, word had begun to move through the tournament grounds, not as rumor this time, but as summons. The lords were called again to the churchyard. Some came irritated at the interruption. Some came already wary. The archbishop came as well, walking with deliberate steadiness, as though he had expected this hour. Arthur stood before them, not elevated upon a platform, but beside the stone itself. Sir Ector spoke first. He did not embellish, he did not dramatize. He recounted simply what had happened. The forgotten sword, the drawing, the return, and the second drawing. Murmurs rose at once.
"Let it be done again,"
a baron demanded sharply. And so Arthur stepped forward. He placed the sword back into the anvil. Several of the strongest lords stepped forward first, men who had tried before, men who had nearly convinced themselves the sword's refusal had been some passing misfortune. They pulled, and the iron did not move. Another tried, and another. The crowd shifted uneasily now, for repetition had become humiliation. At last the archbishop turned to Arthur. Arthur did not raise his eyes to the assembly. He stepped to the stone, placed his hand upon the hilt, and drew the blade free, as though from leather. There was no strain in him. There was strain everywhere else. Silence held for a long moment. Then it broke.
"It is sorcery,"
one lord said openly.
"Merlin's trickery, a boy's deception." "Then let Merlin answer for it,"
another retorted. The archbishop lifted his hand, and the yard quieted gradually.
3 holy days you have tested the sword, he said, and it has not answered one of you. Today it has answered this one. If this be deceit, it is a deceit that has endured under our own watch. If it be providence, then resistance will not unmake it.
The word providence hung heavily in the air. Some knelt at once, not many, but enough to signal movement. Others, however, stood rigid. One powerful duke stepped forward, his voice controlled, but hard.
"Birth alone does not rule men," he said. "If he be Uther's son, let him prove Uther's strength."
It was not a denial. It was a challenge. Arthur heard it plainly, and he did not answer with boast or rebuke. "If strength is required," he said, and his voice did not rise, "then I will seek to show it. Not to seize what is not mine, but to guard what is." The simplicity of the answer unsettled some more than defiance would have. The archbishop, sensing the narrow edge upon which the realm now stood, moved swiftly. "Then let him be crowned," he said, "for the sign has spoken, and let those who doubt prove their doubt openly, rather than whisper it in corners." There was risk in that declaration. Crowning a contested king could ignite open war, but delay would do the same. And so before the gathered lords and under the watch of the church, Arthur was crowned. The authority of it sat uneasily upon young shoulders. Some bent their knee with conviction, some with calculation, some not at all. By nightfall, alliances were shifting, and by dawn, several powerful lords had withdrawn from London without offering homage. The realm had a king in ceremony. It did not yet have a king in peace. The gathering storm. Resistance did not declare itself with trumpets. It gathered in letters first, messages sent quietly between keeps, then in meetings behind stone walls, then in the raising of taxes and levies for armies. The charge was simple. A boy raised away from the court could not command seasoned men. If he were Uther's son, he would need to prove not only birth, but dominion. And so many of the dukes raised their armies. Arthur did not ride out against them in fury. He rode out because he must. The first campaigns were not glorious. They were grinding, uncertain, and costly. Fields once sown were trampled. Villages loyal to one lord found themselves raided by another. The realm's fracture widened before it began to mend. Arthur learned quickly that the sword which moved so easily in stone did not move so easily in war. He was not reckless, but neither was he timid. He listened to counsel, to Sir Ector, to older knights who had ridden under Uther. He observed which men fought for pride and which fought for order. And in the first great clash, when one rebel lord was brought before him in chains, the realm watched closely. The man had spoken openly against Arthur's right of kingship. He had gathered men in defiance. He had caused bloodshed. Some urged execution. "Strike now," they said. "Let rebellion learn its cost." Arthur looked at the prisoner long before speaking. "If I rule by fear alone," he said at last, "then I will have many obedient enemies, and few faithful friends." He ordered the man released under oath. It was not a popular choice among those who preferred certainty, but it was remembered. The war did not cease all at once. There were more battles, and in one of them, Arthur's sword shattered in his hand against the shield of a rival king. The sound of the iron breaking echoed louder in him than in the field. For a moment, doubt struck his soul. Had the sign named him only to abandon him? The battle had gone hard that day. It was in the press of shields and shouting men that the sword had shattered. The crack of iron breaking rang in Arthur's ears even after the fighting thinned. He stood for a moment with the broken hilt in his hand, feeling not only the loss of iron, but the tremor of doubt that followed it. And then Merlin was beside him. Arthur did not see when he had come, but in truth that had always been the way of it. "The sword is gone," Arthur said, holding the broken hilt upward. Merlin regarded the fragments without alarm. "Ride," he said. They left the field without escort, the noise of men falling behind them slowly. The land dipped into low ground where reeds grew thick and the air lay still. There was a forgotten lake there, wide and dark beneath a pale sky. They dismounted and stood on the edge of it. For a time, neither spoke. Arthur was anxious, but Merlin stood as though the passing time did not affect him. Then, from the center of the water, a hand rose slowly above the surface, pale and steady, holding a sword upright as though it had always belonged there. The lake did not break into storm. No thunder answered. Only a quiet ripple spread outward from the lifted blade. Arthur felt a cold at his back, though no wind moved. "Take it," Merlin said softly. Arthur stepped out into the water. It closed around his boots, then his knees. The hand did not withdraw. The sword did not waver. Arthur reached forward and received it. The sword's name was Excalibur. Water fell from the blade in bright droplets before returning to the lake. Arthur did not lift it high. He did not test its edge or hold it aloft. After a moment, he turned from the water and rode back the way he had come, leaving the broken blade where it had fallen. And slowly, through battle and negotiation, through mercy and firmness, the rebellion weakened. Some bent willingly, and some bent from exhaustion. But by the end, they had all kneeled. Let's pause there again. Did you hear that line? "If I rule by fear alone, then I will have many obedient enemies, and few faithful friends." The sword in the stone answered birth. The battlefield answered character. Arthur has now felt what the churchyard did not show him, that a crown invites resistance, and that resistance tests not only strength, but restraint. It would have been easier to execute the rebel lord, easier to make blood a lesson, easier to secure obedience through terror and call it order. Many kings have done precisely that, but a realm held together by fear must always renew that fear. It cannot rest. Arthur chooses something riskier. He chooses mercy. He demands allegiance. Not softness, the wars still rage, but restraint where vengeance would have been applauded. He refuses to let the crown harden him into something smaller than what the sign first required of him. And yet the legend does not romanticize this moment. His sword breaks. The blade that proved him in the stone fails in battle. Iron shatters in his hand. And this is important because it reminds us that signs do not guarantee permanence. Authority received must still be sustained. And to sustain it, one cannot rely on miracle alone. And afterward, Excalibur is given, again, not seized, not forged in pride, but received again. The pattern repeats. Kingship comes to him as a gift, not as a conquest. Still, every gift must be borne. War humbles the boy that the stone revealed. Mercy tempers the king that the crown declared. What is being founded here is not dominance. It is something much more difficult. A realm where strength does not devour law. And such a realm remains fragile. not because it lacks power, but because it refuses to make power its god. Let's move back to the story now. The making of Camelot. War does not always end with a single victory. Sometimes it simply thins out. Rebellions that once burned openly began to falter. Some lords bent the knee after defeat. Others, seeing resistance as costlier than loyalty, offered homage with measured sincerity. A few remained hostile in private, but quiet in public, calculating that time might yet turn. Arthur did not pursue endless vengeance. He consolidated. He traveled. He received oaths in halls that had once closed their gates against him. He confirmed lands to those who would hold them faithfully. He removed those who would not. It was in those years of hard-earned peace that Arthur chose a seat worthy of a settled kingdom, not merely a fortress, not only a stronghold, but a court. Camelot rose not in a single day, nor by enchantment alone, but by gathering. Stone upon stone, timbers lifted, roads cleared, merchants drawn by security, knights drawn by honor. The court that formed there was unlike the war camps of earlier years. It was not organized merely around power, but around fellowship. Arthur did not sit apart as distant tyrant. He gathered around him men who had proven themselves, not only in battle, but in loyalty. Sir Ector stood near him still. Kay remained at his side, older now, sharpened by experience and chastened by what he had witnessed in the churchyard years before. And others came as well. Gawain, fierce and loyal, Bedivere, steady and thoughtful, and Lancelot, and many more, each bringing strength and flaw in equal measure. Arthur saw clearly what war had taught him. Rivalry among great men destroys a realm as surely as invasion. Pride must not be allowed to fracture what the sword had named and blood had tested. So he conceived of a table without a head, round, no seat higher than another, save only the authority that called them together. It was more than furniture. It was an argument that no knight should rise above the fellowship by vanity alone, that strength must be joined together to honor, that disputes would be settled within covenant rather than by private feud. When the round table was first assembled, men studied it with curiosity and caution. Some admired its symbolism. Some suspected it diminished their own stature. But none could deny that something new was being attempted. Not merely rule, but order. The Pentecost Oath. It was at Pentecost, that feast recalling flame and speech given from heaven, that Arthur called his knights to solemn assembly. The hall at Camelot was filled to its length. Banners hung high, torches burned steadily along the walls. Outside, the air carried the scent of early summer. The archbishop, older now and more lined by care, stood again before the realm, as he had in the churchyard years before. He spoke of covenant, of restraint, of justice not merely enforced, but chosen. Arthur rose. He did not speak long. He spoke of what he had seen in war, how quickly strength becomes cruelty when ungoverned. He spoke of how rivalry among knights invites the very chaos they had labored to end. He spoke of the need for a realm where the weak could appeal not only to sword, but to law. Then he required an oath, that no knight would commit outrage or murder, that they would give mercy when mercy could stand, that they would defend women and children, that they would fight not for private vengeance, but for justice, that they would be faithful to the king and to one another. And one by one they came forward. Steel glinted in torchlight as swords were raised and lowered. Hands rested upon hilts as vows were spoken aloud. Some of the voices rang clear, some trembled slightly. Some were spoken with fervor, some with calculation. Arthur stood as each man swore. He did not sit, he did not lean, he bore the weight of what they promised. When the final oath was spoken, silence settled over the hall. Not empty silence, but full. For, in that moment, something more than authority had been founded. A covenant had been spoken into being. It was not forced by iron, nor compelled by fear. It was chosen. And yet even in that, because it was chosen, it was vulnerable. Camelot stood that evening as a vision of ordered strength. The wars had been answered, the sword had named a king, the crown had endured, the table had been gathered. It seemed for a moment as though Britain had found its shape. Let's pause for the last time here. A covenant had been spoken into being. This is the true founding, not the sword drawn from stone, not the crown placed upon a young head, not even the victory in war. A realm can survive a contested succession. It can endure rebellion. It can hold together by strength. But it cannot become more than territory without oath. The Round Table is not merely a place to eat. It is restraint upon rivalry. It is an acknowledgement that even the greatest knights must be bound, not only to a king, but to one another. Arthur does not rule here as solitary conqueror. He stands while others kneel. He listens as they speak. He binds his authority to their vow, and their vow to his justice. That is a dangerous thing, because once strength is yoked to covenant, it can no longer act without reference to it. Once mercy is sworn, vengeance must answer to it. Once fellowship is pledged, betrayal will wound more deeply than defeat ever could. Yet this is the risk that Arthur chooses. He could have ruled as Uther ruled, by fear, by dominance, by keeping rivals divided. Instead, he gathers them. Instead, he binds them. Instead, he attempts to found not merely obedience, but order. And order, when chosen freely, is more beautiful and more fragile than order imposed by terror. Camelot at Pentecost is not naive. It is hopeful. It believes that men can mean what they swear, and in that belief lies both glory and vulnerability. Let's finish the story. That night, the hall did not empty quickly. Knights who had faced one another across battlefields now stood shoulder to shoulder beneath banners newly hung. Cups were raised, not in reckless celebration. There was sobriety in the air, the kind that follows vows rather than victories. Outside, torches lined the walls of Camelot. The fortress did not loom as a threat. It stood as a promise. Messengers would carry word across Britain that the realm had found not only a king, but a court, not only a sword, but a standard. Farmers would plow fields with greater confidence that their harvest would not be seized by the newest warband. Merchants would travel roads with less fear of private feud, and in distant keeps, men who doubted would hear that their rivals now swore loyalty not merely to Arthur, but to a code that restrained them all. Arthur did not linger at the high table long that evening. He walked the hall slowly. He spoke quietly with knights who had once opposed him. He paused beside those who had sworn most fiercely and those who had sworn most cautiously. He knew what war had taught him. Oaths do not end conflict. They direct it. As the night deepened, he stood for a moment alone near the round table, the torches casting shifting light across its surface. It was simple wood, and yet it held the weight of the realm. Camelot was not invincible, but it was ordered. It was settled. And for the first time since Uther Pendragon's death, Britain did not tighten in uncertainty. It exhaled with hope. And so ends the story. Camelot, at its beginning, is not merely a medieval dream. It is an attempt to answer a question that returns in every age. Can strength be bound by virtue? Can power submit to law? Can men swear what they mean and mean what they swear? Arthur's legend does not begin with glory. It begins with obedience. It moves through resistance and restraint, and it culminates, for a moment, in covenant freely spoken. That is why the story endures, not because the sword was magical, not because the battles were grand, but because for a season, Britain believed that authority could be received rather than seized, tested rather than abused, and shared rather than hoarded. The legend does not hide the fragility of that hope. It shows it. The sword in the stone names the king, war proves him, covenant binds him. But covenant depends on men, and men are not iron. This is why Arthur becomes more than a figure in the romances. He becomes memory, a memory of ordered strength, a memory of vows taken seriously, a memory of a kingdom that tried to bind justice and mercy together under one crown. In the American imagination, shaped by covenant, constitution, and conscience, that memory still resonates. Foundings are luminous, oaths are solemn, institutions rise in hope, but they endure only so long as the men within them keep faith. Arthur does not rule forever, no earthly king does. And yet, the legend whispers that he is not entirely gone, not as superstition, but as longing. A longing that the pattern glimpsed in Camelot, strength restrained, authority shared, justice sworn, might one day stand without fracture. Until then, the Round Table remains not only a story, but a question. What kind of men must gather, if such a kingdom is to hold? Thank you for listening to New American Mythos. Next time we will step into a different kind of fracture, where love and loyalty strain against oath, and where the fragility beneath Camelot's brightness begins to show. As a reminder, our Tier 2 and 3 patrons get special perks at the end of the season. Tier 2 patrons get access to the separate audiobook that we are recording for free. Regular listeners can purchase it later on after the season ends. And for our top tier patrons, we are producing a printed, limited edition copy of this season's myths. The limited edition version is our gift to our top tier patrons. Now might be a great time for you to support us on Patreon. The link is in the show notes below. Until next time, remember the sword drawn in service, the crown borne in restraint, and the table where men swore more than ambition. Keep the fire burning.